Good evening. Welcome. So this evening's work will be diving into the pre-circle part of this process. And if you recall, last week I talked about the sort of arc of how restorative circles in this way is held, and the pre-circle is the beginning part. And we're going to have a chance to sit with each other tonight. I'll create some breakout sessions for us at one point. And we're going to dive into this piece of the process. It involves reflective listening, which was what we practiced last week. And this week, I'm going to do a demonstration of the pre-circle. This is the first page in the handout. It's actually about 3 pages. And each of the handouts describes a different aspect of the process. So there's pre-circle, there's the circle, there's a facilitator pre-circle, the post-circle, and then there's some other handouts with regards to substitution, which we'll talk about as we go along. There's a handout about reflective listening. And the very back of the information is a glossary of terms. And I realized as I was beginning to put this work together, we needed a glossary so we have an understanding of the terminology and what we mean in this process. So that's sort of an overview of what the handouts are. And where we'll be going tonight is exploring the pre-circles. So I would like to, do we have anybody else waiting? No, okay. So Alia, if you can keep an eye on the waiting room, that would be great.
Yeah, totally.
Great. So this evening, I would like to invite us to pause a moment and begin to settle into ourselves. And recalling from last week, we talked about and explored a variety of ways of listening. And I like to begin our time together with just taking time to listen to what's going on in ourselves. And it brings us into this moment with each other. So if you would like to shut off your screen and just pause a moment, or close your eyes if you're comfortable doing that, and just take a moment to settle into yourself and notice your breath. And as you notice your breath, just notice where you're at the end of a day for most of us here in the Northeast or around the country. And begin to feel the breath moving from the lungs throughout the whole body. And becoming aware of your body. And then invite your awareness to your feet, feeling your feet on the floor, and feeling connected to earth. And feeling the earth connecting to you, meeting you right at the soles of your feet. Noticing that support. And then feel a gentle energy moving up through the feet and the legs, beginning to come into the body from the earth. Letting that wave of energy coming up through the hips and flowing up through the body, the back, the belly. Through the chest, the shoulders, down through the arms, hands, and fingers. And then feeling that energy continue through the neck and throat, up into the head. And then just above the crown of your head, pause and notice that place where you connect to your higher self. And from that place at the crown of your head, I invite you to imagine a line of energy going up to the apex of a pyramid. And at this apex, our energies meet and greet one another And then we collectively draw lines of energy down to the corners of a pyramid, creating space for our time together. And inside this space of this pyramid, learning is easy and fun. We're able to explore the ideas of listening for the deeper meaning with curiosity as to what we might find. And we create a space within this pyramid where it's okay to explore and encounter conflict that may be coming up for us in our own lives or in the lives of others. And then drawing your attention back to the apex of the pyramid. Feel the support beyond the pyramid from Source, however you envision that. And feel Source meeting the apex of our pyramid and reinforcing with their energy this space. And then just the right amount of energy from the apex, from Source, flows down to meet the crown of your head. And gently invite that energy to enlighten and enliven the crown, that crown chakra. And then bring that energy into the brow, place of inner vision, intuition. Bring this energy to enlighten and enliven the throat and the heart. Feeling this energy in the solar plexus just above the belly button. And in the bowl of the pelvis, the sacral chakra or second chakra. And then the root, right down at the base of the spine. And then pause a moment to let go of all this imagery and breathe for a few breaths in your own way. And when you're ready, gently open your eyes if you've closed them and turn your video on if you let your video go. So welcome. Welcome to this time and space together. I really appreciate all your journey that brought you here today. And would like to invite each of us to take a moment to just check in so we can begin to get to know one another where we're from. I'd like to invite you each to share your name and where you're from, the community that you're connected to that may be bringing you here, and the city or town where you're living. And what I would share, what I would call the homeopathic reason, so maybe a sentence about what brings you here. What is it that drew you here from our experience that many of us attended General Assembly, or however you encountered me in this work? What brings you here? So I'm going to open the mics. Jan, if you could share what brings you here, and go ahead.
I'm Jan. I'm a member of Wildflower UU Church in Austin, Texas. And what brings me here is we have had some rather painful and bitter conflict in our congregation recently about our approach to anti-racism. And it's very much connected to the Gadfly papers and the folks who are very much in sync with those sentiments.
Mm.
And I'm hoping to learn some skills today and the next weeks that will help me understand better what's going on, help me be a better listener to those who are in pain, and help me understand myself better.
Thank you. Thank you, Jan. Maddie, if you can unmute yourself.
Yes, awesome. Hi, everybody. I'm Ati, and I'm from Schenectady, New York, and the congregation is the Unitarian Universalist Society of Schenectady. I think what brings me here is just a lifelong desire to connect on a deeper level, and also that we're in a place where it's so important to have uncomfortable conversations in order to evolve. So both personally and like both on a micro and a macro level. So I'm very happy to be here. And Sarah Elizabeth, I love your meditations. Thank you.
Oh,
So beautiful.
thank you. I'm glad you're enjoying them. Yeah, so uncomfortable conversations are happening for us, for a lot of us, for a lot of different reasons. So Mati, I'm glad you're here as well. Sharon.
Yeah, same. I think it's how we're going to evolve as a society, as civilization. We need to hear each other, and we're all coming from different perspectives. I mean, beyond like just beyond the terrible conflict that's happening, but just like different belief systems. Like I want to
Yeah.
know how to really listen to different belief systems without it triggering me and hear them out, and I want them to hear me out, and so we're not injuring ourselves. And like even my personal family, I feel like I can't even deal with, we're not even able to deal with like the slightest bit of conflict in our beliefs, and I would just like a better way of relating and having deeper relationships with people.
Great, thank you. And where do you live? Where are you coming from, Sharon?
Lilburn, Georgia. I was thinking we're all UUs here maybe, so I'll put my congregation on my name. It's UUCG in Gwinnett and Lawrenceville.
Great, welcome. Zana, can you unmute yourself? There you go.
Yes, I'm sorry. I thought you said Donna. I was looking, where's Donna?
Zana, yeah.
My name is Zana McKay, and I am from Oneonta, New York, which is near Schenectady a little bit.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Georgia. And I'm from the UU Church here in Oneonta, and we have recently had some very serious conflicts where a minister left under duress by an underground group of people personally attacking him. And I have been nominated to be a part of the committee of ministry. And so I need to learn to listen. I can often share my own opinion.
Yeah.
With vigor.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's, I'll talk probably about our congregation's journey with this work. And one of the reasons that we came into this work 10, 12 years ago now was because of the loss of a beloved minister for some, looking forward to somebody else for others, and how that affects our congregation, because we've gone through that a number of times over just the history of our congregation. So we'll speak about that, Zana.
Thank you. We have actually too, that's part of the issues, is it's a repeat thing.
Right.
Where congregation from, Sarah Elizabeth?
I'm in Concord, New Hampshire. Yeah, yeah. So, Wendy, I'm wondering if you would be willing to speak next.
Yes, especially now that I have my light on, so I'm not sitting in the dark.
There you are.
Yep. I'm Wendy, and I live in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I've been here about 4 years, I guess. And I was at GA, as that's how I connected, as a delegate from the Unitarian Universalists of Chattanooga Church.
What brings you here?
Yeah, so personally, I've always been interested in mediation, but true mediation. I looked into going to school for it, but it was competitive based, and and then I sat through a mediation, or I was part of a mediation in a law event, and realized I felt like I was buying a used car, and I was really not on board with that. So I just let the whole thing drop. And then I came to this just personally fascinated with being able to listen and hear, and came back from GA to the church. And it turns out that this is an identified area that we need to put into place. So they're helping me move forward.
Great.
So it's, yeah, it's where I'm supposed to be. So it's cool.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here. And Sandra, can you unmute yourself first? Let's see. It's on the, you find it on your screen? It's on the bottom of the screen to the left. There's a button with a microphone. We still can't hear you. It's on the bottom of your screen.
And not reading the
there you
note.
are.
Now
There we
I
got
am.
it.
So what I was doing was looking at the screen, and what's sitting and right in front of me is a little message that says you want me to unmute.
Yeah, right.
So that worked. Okay. So I'm Sandy Cawthorn from First Unitarian in Orlando, Florida. And what brings me is probably about 5 things. I I pay attention to what has heart and meaning for the speaker, because for me that indicates like an intersection, a place where we could meet to have conversations. And I think I'm a good listener until I begin reading our blocks and realize how much I utilize. So I definitely can develop myself. I have a love for truth and reconciliation, and really hope that we do really move into truth and reconciliation in my lifetime. It would be absolutely wonderful. In our congregation, once a month on Sundays, we meet Wrestling with Race. We've really been delving deeply into it and taking it on. And I am very much interested in, of course, difficult conversations. And then being connected with Black community, I really and truly want to be the kind of person that is always respectful, and I think the listening part's really, really important. I can be fully present, and I don't have any problem with that, but I think that my listening skills could definitely be developed. And I'm aware of your listening circles, because like about 3 years ago, for about 3 years in a row, I was in Bradford, Vermont, and I would come some Sundays over to church services.
Oh, okay. So were you there? Were you
Go
there when
ahead.
I led a service?
I'm
Or
not sure. You know,
okay.
none of the services talked about the circles. I really didn't attend regularly, but I went to the one that's by King Arthur Flower. Is
Yep.
that where you go? Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
I'm in Concord, New
So
Hampshire.
you're
There's
actually in
another one up
Concord, New
there.
Hampshire.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, it was the one that's near King Arthur Flower. So I can't remember
Okay.
what town it is.
Yeah. I'll
Oh,
have to-
well, anyway, I am aware, and then listening to you last week, I'm so appreciative that I have really and truly found the place that I have been looking for, the place of training and learning that I've been looking for. I'm very grateful,
Well,
really
welcome.
grateful.
And
Thanks.
I'm really glad you're here.
Yeah.
And let's see, Sharon, can you unmute yourself?
Oh, I introduced myself already.
Oh, you did. That's right. Alia, would you say a few words?
Yeah, sure. So I'm located in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I think actually conflict resolution, my mom does nonviolent communication, which is another form of conflict resolution. And she's a family and marriage therapist. So I kind of grew up in a very interesting world when it comes to conflict. And I'm always open to learning more. I'm grateful to be here. Sarah Elizabeth is the congregation that brought me here. I'm kidding. But yeah, I'm
The
here.
congregation of me. No.
Right. Yeah. So
Well, I'm really grateful that you're here to support what's
yeah.
going on. So does everyone know how to find the chat on your screen? To nod, okay. So if you find the chat and you need support in some way, if you click on everyone at the bottom of the chat in the little 2 box, it's blue, and you'll see Alia is the co-host. She should come up at the top along with my name. Alia is the co-host. So you can click there and then chat if you've got a question or something technical with Zoom is coming up. And she's going to help us a little bit with some of the, if we're having lots of conversations and there's lots of people talking or wanting to speak, she's going to help sort of follow the flow of the conversation.
There's also a raise hand feature that I believe is it also in the chat? I'm not seeing it right now.
I think it is, actually, you know what? It's not working. I'll have to figure that out.
It's not showing up for us because we're co-hosts.
It's
Oh,
under
I don't have it.
participants.
Okay.
Participants. Okay, perfect.
yeah, so just practice raising your hand, and on your screen you'll see you've got a little blue hand. If you go into the participants list,
Great.
okay, yep, I see Sandy's hand, and then I can lower it from here, and I see Wendy found it. So it's in the participants list, and it should say raise hand. Yep,
Great.
Xana found it. Great.
Jan. Perfect.
And Maddie found it. Great. Okay, so that's probably how we'll use it. A couple of other things that are fun with Zoom is if somebody is speaking and, whoops, here goes my technology. If someone is speaking and you're agreeing with them or something like that, you can like wiggle your hands. It doesn't necessarily mean you're like waving, but you can just kind of like let us know, or you put a thumbs up that you're in agreement, that kind of thing. And it kind of gives us a sense that we're all in this together. So thank you for taking a moment to check in. And it's really good for me, from my perspective, to know what it is that is, you know, where you're all coming from. So what I'd like to do is to do a little bit of talking first, and then I'm just grabbing my worksheet here. I'd like to do a little bit of talking about what a pre-circle is, and after I give a little introduction to this, I want to do a demonstration with one of you with doing a pre-circle, so that we'll walk you through it. We'll have a little conversation about it, and we'll probably take a break after the Q&A, and then we'll come back and we're going to put you together with someone else in the room. We'll do breakout sessions, and you will each get time to pre-circle each other. So that's the flow of this evening, and there'll be some Q&A after that. So that's the flow of things. I would like to know if there's anyone who has a conflict that's going on with them. Whoops. Is there somebody? Thanks. Does anyone have a conflict that you would be willing to speak about into the room in a few minutes? And if you do, okay, Sharon's got her hand up. So we'll talk in a few minutes, and Wendy's got one. Pretty much everybody's gonna have, oh no. Oh, she was saying, great, go Sharon. So let me just say a little bit about the pre-circle and where it fits within this process. The pre-circle happens before the circle occurs. So if you were to facilitate a conversation between two people or a group of people, would you want to walk into that conversation blank, not knowing a thing about it? No, that would be really like, okay, what is it I'm doing here? So the pre-circle is designed to allow the facilitator to know all the parts of the conflict. And in the first pre-circle, we call that the initiating pre-circle, which is what we'll do tonight with each other. We are looking to identify an event or an act, something that was said or done within the community that will be the doorway into the conversation. So this event or act is simply something that happened, that an author, the person who did the act or said whatever they said, and the receiver received that act. So I like to simply say, well, when Sally hit Johnny, there's very clear, Sally is the author, Johnny is the receiver, and hitting is the act. So Sally hit Johnny. Well, it could be that if we're talking with Sally, let's say, she's wanting to resolve this conflict, we might find out from Sally that Johnny said something to her that caused her to feel so upset and angry that she punched Johnny. So we could have identified that Johnny said whatever he said to Sally as the act or the event. And what we understand about conflict is there are multiple acts, multiple events that happen that give us a direction towards the conflict that we're trying to engage with. And people will ask, well, does it matter what you choose? And there's an art to finding what that is. It takes practice. And that's one of the things our community did before we even started what we call live circles, is we took what we learned in this kind of workshop back and we worked with each other twice a month, practicing and setting up a system. And as we go through, I'll be giving little stories about how our community brought this back home, if you will. But that's one of the things, is we created a team of people in our congregation, which is about 250 to 300 people, depending upon when you're measuring. And we had initially a group of 50 people that trained together. 15 of us decided that we would form a team, and we began to practice together, as I said, twice a month. So in this pre-circle that I'm going to demonstrate, I'm going to be using reflective listening, the same thing we did last week in pairs as the second exercise. And I'm going to be asking this person what was done that you would like to bring to a restorative circle. And it's going to sound like I'm repeating this. And I'm going to then listen for what it is, in this case, Sharon is going to share with me about her conflict. And I'm going to be looking to identify this event or this act, and help her to help name what it might have been. And it may be very clear that it's one particular thing, or it may be murky, it may be 2 or 3 different things, and we're going to kind of sort that out. Ultimately, because I'm listening for what it is that's happened, Sharon's the one that gets to choose, although I may give her a little bit of guidance along the way. The other part of the pre-circle, which I will review with you tonight, is to tell about what this process is like. And the script for the pre-circle has that written, and I'm going to pretty much read it because I feel it's important. At first, when you're practicing this, is to read through the script and stick to the script of the questions. We found that this really works. And you'll notice that in the circle, I will just keep repeating almost like a mantra the question, waiting for someone to feel ready to share their response to that question. And the same thing will happen in a pre-circle. Are there any questions so far? Nope, okay. So Sharon, I'm wondering, so this is what I'd like to do because this will help our video recording for the folks that are not able to come this week. Oh, and I didn't mention this to everyone. Is everybody okay with this being recorded tonight? For learning purposes, I'm seeing thumbs up from everyone. Okay, great. So that there are a few people that can't be here and I'd like to share this with them. So thank you for that. So what I'd like to ask is if everyone except Sharon can find the stop video button. And if you stop your videos, what will happen is Sharon and I will be on the screen together, just the two of us.
I want to change. I'm changing my mind. Who else would like to share something?
Oh, is there someone would like to share? Xana, would you like to be in the hot seat, if you will? Okay. And Sharon, you'll have a chance in a breakout session to work with that conflict sort of off screen. So, all right, so great. Okay, so.
Xana, you're
okay.
still muted.
Yes, Xana, can you
There we go.
There you go.
I'm not sure I was listening as a participant, but I think I got it all.
Okay. All right, now I'm gonna hide everybody. Great, so if you want to just see Xana and myself, if you click on anybody else's video, you can say hide video, non-video participants, and it should be just Xana and I on the screen. So Xana, thanks for coming. And I'm wondering what it is that's happened that you would like to bring to a restorative circle.
I feel as if members of my spiritual community made a decision to irrevocably alter my community without my permission. And that made me very angry and upset.
So you've had members of your community take actions that have split the community, and that's made you really upset.
Would you like me to be more specific?
Well, again, what was said or done that you bring to a restorative circle?
The minister, who I found to be a very strong social justice leader, and this was a wonderful gift for me. There were people in the community who, unbeknownst to me, did not feel heard by him, or that they liked him, or felt it was time for him to move on. So they attacked his clothes and his hair and his suspenders, and they also, as in many communities of faith, there are some people who struggle to hold a balanced mental health issue, and I felt they unfairly took advantage of how easily these people could be incited to be uncivil. And
so let me just make sure that I'm understanding. So you had a minister in the community who was attacked for the way in which he chose to dress by some members of the community. And it sounds like you were just starting to talk about some mental health issues that you feel are involved in this attack.
Well, the minister was attacked because members of the community wanted him to leave. And so they resorted to personal attacks about him. I don't know, had they met him on the street, that they would have cared what his suspenders looked like. There was a need to drive him out of our congregation that led to them creating an underground group of people that relentlessly attacked him.
So these attacks came on a regular basis over a period of time from a small group of people? Or,
Yeah.
And sounds like that small group of people got other people on board.
That's
with
correct.
this. Okay. Is there something that was said or something that was done, something specific that you're aware of that was said or done that would allow us to, with everyone would be able to say, oh yes, I know that happened, or many people would say, yes, I know that specific thing happened? And you've said that some individuals have attacked him for what he was wearing or the color of his hair.
That's one of the difficulties that I'm struggling with, is that he was attacked, but not while I was there. And so he came to the community and said, you need to figure out what kind of community you want to be. But I had no way to respond because I wasn't there when it happened. And when he left, there was celebrating. So here's something that was said. I'm trying to think of something this is one of the difficult, it's a very nebulous. Do you want me to keep going, or you need to?
Yeah, please.
So,
I'm just taking some notes.
We have been doing Zoom church meetings, and after the service, we have breakout small groups. And in this particular, after church in this particular time, there were only 2 people in this one breakout group. One woman who I know worked hard to drive him out, and me. And she had asked me what I thought, and I told her, and in the past. And when we came to this group, she said, well, now he's gone. Are you feeling better about all this? And I said, no. And we had a conversation back and forth. And ultimately I said, the issue is that you denied me my spiritual home without any input from me. And this wasn't agreed, and you didn't come to the congregation and act in covenant to resolve this. And I said, how would I know if this is going to happen again? Will you do this again? And she said, not if they don't stay longer than I want. And that,
meaning the minister.
right. I said, how do we know the next person won't be driven out? And, but that is probably one of the only, but I'm very direct. And so when people would come to me and say, do you think it's time that Craig moved on? I would say, absolutely not. I really like this. I like that. This is how I'm appreciative. And so I was never involved in the attacks.
So you were in this breakout session after a church meeting on Zoom, and you were you and this other woman. Does she have a name, or can you give her a name?
Linda.
Sorry?
Linda.
Linda. So you and Linda were in this breakout room together and were able to have a private conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And she at one point said, are you feeling better about this minister now that he's gone? you know,
Mhm.
about this situation, and you said, no, you've denied me a place for my spirit, where I find my spiritual home, without my having any input into it, and you're concerned that it might happen again. And Linda responded, well, it won't happen again unless they stay longer than I want them to.
Right. That is correct.
So I'm wondering in this conversation if there's one of these statements that feels like it gives us a frame, or it summarizes this conflict.
When she said, not if
When
they don't
she's,
stay too long.
yeah, so is that what summarizes the conflict, or could it be when you said to Linda, you denied me my spiritual home?
Oh, um,
I'm just wondering which of these gives a frame to the conflict, or helps us say, oh, that's,
I think that one, when I said this, yeah, without my input.
so the statement that you made was, without my input. I'm just writing this down. You denied me my spiritual home. Is that what you said?
That's right.
Okay. And you said this to Linda.
Yes.
Okay. So in this case, and this is for learning purposes for everybody, you are naming yourself as the author and Linda as the receiver. And so this is very clear that you said to Linda, in fact, you probably saw it on Zoom, or Linda saw it on Zoom, just like a camera would see it right on her desktop, when you said to Linda, without my input, you denied me my spiritual home. Yeah. So I'm wondering if in a moment, I'm going to ask who else needs to be present to resolve this conflict.
Ah,
And I'm also going to ask you if you're willing to go ahead with having a circle around this issue.
mm,
So again, for people who are listening, we're looking for agreement to participate, and we're also looking for who needs to be present to resolve the conflict, because we want to have in the room the people who are invested in seeing the conflict resolved. So I'm going to ask you those questions in a moment, but first I'd like to explain the process to you and give you an opportunity to ask any questions you might wish to ask, so that you understand, when you agree, you understand what it is that will be happening. So in reviewing this process, I'm going to check in and make sure that you want to go ahead. So over the course of the next few weeks, I will contact the people whose names you give me.
mhm,
And I will do the same process with them. We will get clear about what has happened and the meaning that this has for each of them. And then I'll check in that they're clear about the process, as I'm doing right now with you. Each person will have an opportunity to let me know who else needs to be present to resolve this conflict. If any of them decide not to attend the circle, then I'll ask some of my colleagues who are experienced restorative circles facilitators to substitute for them, so
mhm,
that the process can still go forwards.
mm,
No one person can keep the circle from happening, because what we find is it's important, if someone is calling a circle, it's important that that person and the community gets to have the conversation.
mhm,
Once I've met with all the people being called to the circle, I'll set up a time for all of us to gather together in a
mhm,
meeting space, and probably right now it would be over Zoom. The reflective dialogue process that we've been using today will ensure that everyone is heard. It's not just the words that we're using, but the meaning that we want other people to understand. And
mhm,
I'll help facilitate that and guide everyone to be reflective.
Mhm.
The circle environment supports connection in the present moment. It supports people understanding each other and what was happening for each person at the time they chose to act.
Mhm.
Once there's understanding of the feelings and the needs that we each are bringing to the conversation,
Mhm.
then the community will be asked to decide how would you like to resolve the conflict and what would you like to do next. So my input is to hold space for that conversation to happen. And it's not my role to tell you, oh, Xana, you need to do this, or Linda needs to do that. It will be for you all to decide together what will resolve this for you.
Mm.
We'll put a time frame on the actions
Mhm.
that you've chosen, and then part of that plan will be to meet again, maybe a month or 2 months down the road, to
Mhm.
just evaluate how this plan is working out and how satisfied are we with the process
Mhm.
and with our conversations. At that time, we can decide to celebrate because we feel like we've been able to hear each other and the resolution plan that we put in place has helped. Sometimes there's need for more listening,
Mm.
and sometimes there's need to create a few more steps to resolve the conflict more fully
Mhm.
to satisfy people's and to make sure that people are happy with each other.
Mm.
So I'm wondering if you have any questions about anything that I've shared so far.
Well, in this particular context, what I know is that there's a group of people who meet once a week for breakfast, and that
Mhm.
they are the ones together that have driven this, and Linda is a part of that group. So I'm uncertain whether I need to identify this whole group or whether you think I could move ahead with Linda.
Well, usually in my experience, if there's a group, do you know how many people are in that group?
I think it's about 5.
Okay. So, and are you familiar with who those people are and the
Yeah.
names of them?
Mhm.
Okay. So it would be Linda, and again, you can make up names for this purpose.
Mhm. Grace and Mary and Brenda.
Okay. So that's probably a representation of the members of that group.
Mhm.
Is there anyone else beyond those people who you think need to be present to resolve this conflict?
Well, the issue is that I believe there's a number of people that feel similarly to me.
Yeah, so are there a couple of people that would be helpful to have in the conversation? Again, to thinking about this idea that who needs to be present to resolve this conflict for your community?
I think some of the previous board members like Carrie and Brenda and Suzanne and Ben.
Ben?
Ben.
Ben, okay.
Um,
You mentioned Brenda twice. Are there two
Frank
Brendas
Brenda.
or just one?
2.
There are two Brendas. Okay.
I'll just change that to Beth.
Okay. Beth?
Mhm.
Okay. Okay, so we've got a number of people that need to be there. So
Yeah.
I'm just going to review them, and then, you can let me know their contact information and whatnot. But Linda and Grace, Mary and Brenda, and those people are the folks that meet for breakfast
Yeah.
once a week. And then Carrie and Suzanne and Ben, are they members of the board or members of other community?
Members of the board are past members.
Okay. And then Beth.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. Great. So I'm just writing those things down. So when you hear that list, does that feel like the list of people that needs to be present to resolve the conflict?
I think so, at least to begin it.
Yeah, to begin the conversation. Great. So I'm wondering if you would like to proceed and participate in this circle conversation.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I just want to let you know that over the course of the next few weeks, I'll be reaching out to the list of people that you've named. And I'll be having the same kind of conversation with them. I'll be listening for their point of view. In some cases, I may meet with more than one person at a time. We call that a community pre-circle. I will likely meet with Linda just on her own because she's the receiver of the act. And I will also ask them if anyone knows beyond this list of people who else needs to be present to resolve the conflict. And usually, although it sounds like we could name many members of the community, there's usually a sense that these are the people that need to resolve this particular conflict. And it doesn't mean that part of the plan isn't to inform the wider community of these conversations. That may be something that comes up during the conversation, is in terms of, you know, we just don't know right now.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you have any other questions, Santa, before we part?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming to see me, and I will be in touch with you within a few weeks. And don't be surprised if a little time goes by while I'm doing this. And if you have any thoughts or questions, or you just want to reach out for any reason to ask where we're at in the process, please feel free.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, here ends our demonstration. So if you all want to turn back on your videos, so coming back into the room. Great. So this is what a pre-circle looks like. And sometimes a pre-circle may go on. It may be that the person bringing the conflict really has a lot more to share. And there may be more energy or less energy around that particular conflict or whatever it is that's coming up for people. Are there any questions at this point about what you saw, anything that was coming up for you that you'd like to ask about? Or
well, I'm just wondering, I'm looking at the handouts that you shared, and it looks to me, I was reading it before class, and it looked to me like the pre-circle was was for the person running the circle to be sure that they were clear to do that. Am I wrong on that?
The pre-circle is for the facilitator. So in this case, I was the facilitator, and the initial pre-circle is like this, where we have an open-ended conversation about what is it that was said or done that you would like to bring to a conversation. Now, when I meet with Linda, I already know and have identified the event. So when I'm meeting with Linda, the question, if you look on the first page, there's a place. Oh, so on the top of the second page, if I'm speaking to Linda now or to the community, I would ask, what was said or done that's calling you to this restorative circle? So at that point, I'm not looking to name the event. We have already named the event. And in fact, one of the things that we learned in this process as we started doing this is when you're calling the circle, there's a little bit of power in choosing how you frame the conflict. So we could have flipped it around and named Linda as the author. And we could have said that Linda, when she said to, when she asked this question, so how are you feeling now? What was it? When she asked the question, now that he's gone, are you feeling better about this? So that could have been the act, and she would have been the author and you would have been the receiver. One of the things we find is that people who trust the process will name themselves as the author. And it's often easier for people saying, oh, this is what I did, to get other people to come to the conversation. Because we've already leaned in and we trust the process, we've been practicing, etc.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? Any thoughts about how you saw, as you were looking at this from the outside, how you saw the dialogue going and how it might be similar or different to what you already understand? So Wendy's wondering, do you mean how I picked the event that I identified? Yeah. It was really up to Linda to name it. For her, what is it that summarizes? There are a couple of terms that we use. What is it that captures the conflict, or what is it that sums up the conflict for the person asking to hold the circle? So I could have leaned in, and sometimes I will gently nudge the person initiating the conversation in one way or another. It really doesn't matter what you choose. This is what we call the doorway into the garden of conflict. So in this case, ultimately the conflict is the minister got kicked out, and that happened in our congregation, right? That ultimately we could have said the minister got kicked out, but in saying that, we can't see that with a video camera.
Right.
We want to identify something that was actually said or done so we can have a clear sense of this is something that happened, knowing that this is the doorway that opens to the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So on some levels, we might think of it as, well, we're kind of tiptoeing around it. But can you see how this summarizes the conflict? You know, for Xana, the conflict is, my spiritual home isn't my spiritual home anymore. And that may be for some other people in the community as well. And yet, when and if I talk to Linda, Linda might say, well, my spiritual home wasn't my spiritual home because X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm.
So what the idea of the circle is that we come together to have a conversation. So Xana and Linda, who are probably not hearing each other very well right now,
Mm-hmm.
I could be wrong, but we're not hearing each other around this issue. And it creates a space where we can talk about our feelings and needs in the circle together and come to understand all the things that went into this event of the kicking out of the minister. So this is just a doorway. And there are, a garden has multiple sides. We could have chosen a different way to come into the conversation. Or let's say I had a conversation with Carrie, who is the past board chair. Carrie might have a very different sense of what might highlight and point us in the direction of this conflict. If I'd talked to Linda, Linda might have chosen something entirely. Linda might have chosen something that the minister did.
Right.
Or said. Might have, we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it really doesn't matter. And to me, and Linda, Xana, you can speak to this. It seemed really natural for you to say, oh, well, this is what happened.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like a very natural thing. And so sometimes that's what I go with. What feels natural to the person bringing it. It's not really my decision.
Mm-hmm.
And I can sometimes say, well, this sounds like, and then we try it on.
Mm-hmm.
I could have asked her to try on, well, what about this question of, hey, the minister's gone, aren't you happy? So it's just allowing us into the conversation. And we'll see as we get into the circle demonstration, not next week, we'll see how this conversation, identifying the act, will help us enter that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In a moment, I'm going to create breakout rooms for everyone. And I've just allowed this to be random today. Alie, I've put you in a breakout room and I'll step in with you. So what I would like to do is I will set a timer and let you know when 15 minutes is up. So I have everybody sectioned out into breakout rooms. You'll be with one other person. I would like each person to have an opportunity to be the speaker and to be the facilitator. So there will be 15 minutes for you to speak and be heard by the facilitator. And then I will give you a signal and it'll be time to switch roles. So wrap up the last piece of that conversation and then switch. It may feel very quick. That 15 minutes goes by fairly quickly. Give yourself an opportunity, as you saw with Xana and I, if a lot of information is shared all at once, it can be too much to reflect. So if you're feeling like you have a lot of details in your head when you're listening, put your hand up and just say, can we pause a moment? I'd like to make sure I understand what you're saying. And then step into a little bit of reflection. You don't have to get it all, but get the meaning of what is being shared. So think about if you're hearing spoken of some feelings, or they're tiptoeing around some feelings or some needs, see if you can identify what that might be. And check in. Oh, well, I noticed that you might have been feeling a little afraid, or you might have been feeling a little uncomfortable here. Try and identify some of those things that may not be directly spoken of and see what happens. And if you have a moment to get something a little bit wrong, that's okay too. We don't have to be perfect reflective listeners, because the speaker will say, no, that's not what I meant this. And sometimes what we're hearing them say, they may hear the reflection back and go, wow, I don't know if I was really speaking what I meant to say. And you may, when you're speaking, find that what you're saying or how you were saying something isn't landing the way you intended. And so you may say, no, that's not what I meant, and correct them because what you said didn't land the way you meant it to land. So just play with this. Anybody have any questions about what we're going to do? And if you do have questions or something comes up, you can, I think when you're in the breakout, I think you can message me through the chat, or there's a little place to call me into the room and I'll come into the room and answer your questions, okay? Has everybody done breakout? Well, everybody did breakouts last week, right? So I'm gonna open the breakout rooms. I'll give you 15 minutes and come on back when your conversation is done, or when the 1 minute, when I call you back, you'll have 1 minute to kind of say whatever final things before Zoom will take you in. Yep.
So
Anna?
I just want to be clear that the conversation is somebody's presenting for 15 minutes, a conflict similar to the way I presented.
Yes, so
Okay.
choose a conflict. And what I'd like to suggest, thank you, I closed the room for just a second. Choose a conflict which is energetically for you like between a 3 and a 5. Doesn't have to be something big.
Mm-hmm.
And what I like to ask is that it's something that you would like to learn a little bit about. You like to gather some information for yourself about this particular conflict and what's going on. So Xana, you might want to work on this a little bit more, or you might have something else. But this one sounds like you could, dive into a little more of it if you'd like.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions before I send you into breakout rooms?
Am I going into a breakout room or am I staying with you?
You're going to hang with me.
Okay.
You're going to be invited, but you're going to hang with me. Sharon, are you here? Can you just raise your hand? Okay. All right, great. All right, here you go. You'll get an invitation. Welcome back from the breakouts. And I'd like to have a little conversation with folks about how that was for you. And in particular, I'd like to ask our speaker selves, so when you were speaking about the conflict, what was this like to be in this conversation and be heard in this way around your conflict? This time when we were looking for identifying what it was that was said or done that pointed us towards our conflict. And if you'd like to use your raise hands, that can be really helpful.
What were the two questions again?
So first, the question is, putting on your speaker hat when you were speaking about your conflict,
Okay.
what was this like, and how was it for you to try and identify the event or act, what was said or done around that conflict? What was that like?
I guess I could go first.
Sure.
It took me a while to focus on what I wanted to talk about. And then it was like a very kind of centering, solid feeling when I started talking about it and thinking about it. And it helped me also talking helped me describe the situation better and make it more understandable to the person who was listening. So it was kind of a relief, temporary relief, to also get that out.
So just being heard around this, it felt satisfying within you to really kind of get to identify what it is that was happening and get some clarity around this issue.
Sure.
A little bit more clear. And were you able to, did you want to go forwards with the circle after that experience?
Yeah, sure.
Great, thank you. Jan. There you are.
One of the things that I found while I was speaking was that the conflict that I was describing was not between me and someone else. It was between different factions in my congregation. And that made it easier in some ways and harder in others. It made it easy for me to identify the parties who were involved, but harder in that I haven't had personal experience with some of what has happened. So it's difficult for me to identify exactly what has happened. I've been a listener to people on both sides of the controversy. And so I know what I've been told, but I don't have a lot of direct experience. And that made it a little hard to, there's certainly a need for conflict resolution. There's no question about that. But it made it a little bit hard for me to describe the situation.
So Jan, you were noticing that you thought there was a narrowness to the conflict. And as you were talking about it, you realized it's a conflict that includes a number of people and that there are different factions on either side of the conflict. And you've been doing a lot of listening to everyone. So you began to see the garden of conflict, if you will, as between multiple people. And yet, because you've been listening to others, it's harder for you to figure out what exactly was said or done. How could I point in that direction? Mm-hmm. And so you might have needed a little more time with your facilitator guiding you towards thinking more specifically about what was said or done. What did you hear? You know, one person said this to another. And just as an example, sometimes the person bringing the conflict is neither the author nor the receiver. They're a community member or a representative of the community, and they're noticing that they're hurting because of the conflict amongst other people. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes it can be challenging to identify what that one thing is that was said or done. And it might be that we have to listen as facilitators a little more deeply, a little more to hear what this community member might have heard and ask, you know, so finding some things that were actually witnessed as being said or done between a couple of community members that point us in the direction, oh, this is what gives us a sense of what the conflict is. So thank you for that. Xana, can you unmute yourself?
I forgot what I'm doing. What am I talking about?
So what was, as a speaker,
Right.
what was this like to be heard in this way? And
Yeah.
in particular, to move towards this sense of identifying an act and defining that.
Well, you know, actually it was very powerful for me because I had gotten to hear my speaker talk, so I felt really empathetic and connected to them. And then when I spoke, there was this response which was so authentic that it validated the wound that I felt. And that was very powerful because I was able to identify a moment that to me I'd been carrying around, but I'd been sort of hiding it because I'm like, well, was it really that bad? You know, and when there was a response, I felt like, yeah, it was. And
Right.
it helped me recognize that this is a real valuable thing and that it can be maybe negotiated and resolved.
So you can, even through this conversation of being heard around this issue, it helped you get more clear. I'm hearing that piece. And it helped you recognize the feeling, where the source of the feeling of discomfort inside yourself around this conflict.
Yes.
And you can begin to see that there's a possibility for resolution if you find there are certain things you need to understand, but there's a possibility of resolution of this. Just from being heard, you can see the possibility.
And I think that started last week, so I'm a little confused about what's going on. But honestly, my listeners' response was so authentic and valuable in that way that I do think what really was surprising to me is how helpful that was, not in pushing me to stay in a negative place, but in helping me feel comfortable to move out of it.
Yeah. So what you're speaking about is when we're heard, when we're really heard, we soften inside ourselves.
That's how it felt.
Yeah, we soften inside ourselves. It's like, oh, yeah, somebody gets me. And then I don't have to hold it all myself. I've shared it. So I want everyone witnessing this idea to think about when we're preparing, when we're doing pre-circles, not just with the person bringing it, but with the community members and with the author and the receiver. Each person we speak to softens in this way a little bit towards each other, towards themselves, because they've gotten more clear. And it opens the doorway of the heart, I think, to being willing to come to the circle. There's a trust that you develop with the facilitator, and it leads you in that direction of being willing to say yes. Did you say yes? Did you get to be asked, do you want to go forwards with this circle?
We got there, did we?
So if you did get there, right now, if she had asked, are you willing to go forwards, what would you say?
Yes. And actually it was interesting because last week I realized sorry about my cat.
That's okay.
I just realized the depth of my pain, and I also realized that it came from feeling silenced, and that other people in the congregation that I was struggling to understand had felt silenced. I felt empathy in a way that I had not before.
And this is another really important thing, is that reflective listening. People will ask me, well, why are we not doing empathy? Because there's this whole process through NVC of offering empathy to someone. And in my experience, when we pause and we reflect the meaning of what we are hearing, keeping ourselves out of it, that is really empathy. That's when someone speaking to us, especially about their conflict, really feels empathy because they're heard. And it's someone at the GA workshop, for some of you that were there may remember that one of the comments, and I'm going to remember this for a long time, the woman said, I've been practicing empathy for so long and I didn't know it was this easy. It was like a light bulb moment. So thank you, Xana.
Thank
Wendy, Whoops.
Yeah. Okay. I'm here.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. As a facilitator, as a speaker,
Yeah.
it was, it allowed me to explore each of the voices of what was happening or going on. And I think I was going back to the doorways into the garden, trying to understand, how do I pick one? You know, how do I, so there was this facilitator piece that was happening in my brain, and it may have been because I was second, so I was, you know, self-facilitating.
Right.
To how to narrow it in. And it was also not a conflict that happened. I was not the author, nor was I the receiver. So I was still trying to sort out the actions. So
Yes. So did you get to choose one, or you were
Not
in the
quite.
process?
we
Yeah,
were,
not quite.
yeah.
Yeah, and so this is, again, you know, it takes some time, especially when we're a member of a wider community and it's not necessarily us that's authoring or
Mhm.
receiving the act. It can take a while to point in that direction.
Mhm.
And it also sounds like, as the speaker, you began to explore the dynamics of that garden of conflict, if you will. You could see, oh, here's this interaction, here's this other interaction, here's this other set of interactions. And it helped you to better understand the whole garden. And maybe, again, if asked, what was said or done that you would like to bring to a circle? And as facilitators, that question, coming back to that question and pausing and waiting for the person speaking to just think. And it's important to give the person asking for a circle, to give them time to pause and think about what it is that's going on. So if you notice that there were these pauses in your conversation, give yourself thumbs up for that, because that's that place of cultivating themselves inside that we wait for. You know, you may have found yourself, Wendy, just being quiet for a moment and thinking, oh,
Mhm.
what is it that happened that I want to bring to the circle?
Yeah, which totally goes against the way society is right now, where you have to say and
Right.
and drill down to it right now. And
Yeah.
so it was nice to have that space, to have that pause, the ability to speak slowly.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And this is the other part of this process that I think is really helpful for the resolution of conflict. It asks us to slow down. It takes a little bit of time to pause and put your hand up and say, could you pause a moment? Wendy, I'd really like to make sure I'm understanding what you're sharing with me.
Mhm.
And we find different ways of saying that. You know, could I just reflect what I'm hearing? Or can I let you know what I'm understanding? There are lots of ways to say give that same meaning of inserting yourself, because we're not used to that. And yet, as other folks have said, once we're heard, it's like, whew, I feel so much relief. I'm like so much happier that I've let someone else really hear, and oh my gosh, I got heard. So Xana, I see your hand, but I want to switch the hats that we're wearing. And I want to just notice that we're at about 8:38. If you're feeling like it's time for you to go, I can understand that, but I'd like to ask us to put on our facilitator's hat and share with each other, what was this like to facilitate and really listen in this way and invite someone towards identifying an act? What was this like? And I'm wondering if there's some folks who haven't shared who would like to share. So if you'd raise your hand, or you can put your hand up in the screen. I see Sandy's hand. Anybody else? So Sandy, go ahead. What was this like to facilitate in this particular way? And then I see Mati.
There. Okay. I liked it. I like the concept of it, and I got caught up in my partner's struggling to find her words. So I think that didn't bring it very far along. I consider, but I like the format. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that the place that I came to is, or stayed very much in the very beginning of it, trying to find the word or phrase, I think was about as far as we got to be. And there was a struggle for finding words. I had the same experience. And so I don't know that there was a really very much of a place to be able to reflect, perhaps. I didn't feel like I did very much reflecting.
Yeah, so you were noticing as facilitator that there's this need to practice this idea of reflecting, that it feels like a skill that you're just trying on. And it was challenging to help guide and listen and reflect what you were hearing. So you're noticing that some practice might be in order.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. And this, I will keep drilling this one home too through our whole time together, and I'll start by saying it now. This is a practice. And we start out noticing that we've maybe not been listening as deeply as we thought we might have. And we also notice we may not be heard by other people as much as we hope we're being heard, when we start putting on this idea of really being reflective and deeply listening to someone. And this is a practice. And so we'll talk about, by the time we get to the end, we'll talk about how do we bring this home and how do we create ways in which to practice that allow us to be with each other in this different way than we are used to being. And how do we bring that home for ourselves and bring that home for our communities. So thank you. Mati? What was this like to practice facilitating?
I was so, and I love to listen so much that I felt like, oh, I have to go back to the handout, you know, like I could just listen forever. So it's just, I feel like, you know, like a little seedling that's dry. I just put a little water. It's just such a beautiful practice that I just love it. And then I realized when I was looking at the handout, I wasn't seeing the words or. So I thought I had to ask all of those questions. We did actually find a key moment. So I just was, because I was like listening and then trying to, okay, yeah. what's my job so I don't get lost in my reverie here. And so then I never got to the question, what was said or done that is calling you to a restorative circle. But I think it was, you know, we weren't far away from it. Yeah. So it's just that whole, like the process versus the product, which is usually where I tend to get lost. I'm a much more of a process person. So just to stay focused on the task was the biggest challenge.
Yeah, and this is a first shot at it. Right?
Yes.
This is a brand new first shot at something brand new. And maybe you've been listening, and this idea of reflective listening, and it's like, wow, this is really cool. Wow, there's this piece here, and I'm really pleased at how this part is going. And then it's like, oh, which question? Oh, I don't have to do them all at once. I can do one at a time. Or, you know, how do I? And these questions here, which are guiding questions to help, and the initial pre-circle move in the direction of how do we understand this. So by you know, I'm wondering which part of what you said captures or sums up the conflict for you. and then pausing
Yeah.
and listening. Or this other question, is there any key moment? And this is for when people are really struggling to identify what might have happened. A couple of people had some challenges with that. So these questions can be helpful. Is there any key moment that stands out for you that represents this event or this conflict? Or hearing again, can we, what can we access the meaning that there is within this conflict? And asking that question, what would you like to bring to a restorative circle, can sometimes be what it is that opens the door. And these questions are very open-ended. And you'll notice that they allow spaciousness and they're non-judgmental. We're not saying, well, so Mati, I understand that this happened and that happened, and what would you like to say about that? Or, which piece, what is it that you judge to be the right doorway or the right conversation to have? It's none of that. What do you think captures this conflict? And this is a practice. So good for you for practicing and using this time to be reflective and feel your way through that. And you can see the possibility of coming to identify an event because you probably heard a number of things that were said that are possible. And so what you might do is go back and check in and say, oh, well, I heard you say that you said this to so-and-so, and just try that on. Does this summarize the conflict? And then you might say, I heard so-and-so said this to you. Does that summarize it? And sort of try it on. We didn't have that with Xana earlier, but sometimes there are 2 or 3 things that were said or done. And you just have the person try it on and then step back and listen, reflect again, and let them do their internal thinking. Yeah. Is there anyone else who would like to share about what this was like to facilitate? And again, this is our first foot in the water. So it doesn't have to be perfect right now. We're just practicing. And we'll get better as we practice more and cultivate that trust in ourselves. Anyone else want to speak about what it was like to facilitate? John, yeah.
I felt like I was being helpful as I guided the person I was listening to be clarified what was the nexus of thing, what was starting things, what was her really main concern.
Yeah, so you found it was really helpful to get clear and just stay with that process and move into this and create a space to identify this act and what happened. Yeah, and this reflective listening can help us be more clear about what's happening, just as the person who's speaking becomes more clear for themselves. Yeah, so a couple other things about the pre-circle before we close for tonight. Remember I talked earlier about the pre-circle. We want to pre-circle the author. We want to pre-circle the receiver, and usually those pre-circles are done by themselves. So it's a one-on-one, or in our community, we actually had a pair of facilitators. We co-facilitated, and we would both meet with the author. We'd both meet with the receiver. And then if there was a list, like in Xana's case, I would have met with Linda by herself. And then there were 5 or 6 other people that were listed. So what I might do is offer 2 times when I'm available to listen to the community and have community pre-circles. So that's where I would do the same reflective listening, but instead of one person being in the room, there might be 2 or 3 other people. So Xana had named Grace and Mary and Brenda as being on one side of the conflict. So I might have tried to meet with them together because they know their side of the conflict. And then I might have met with Carrie and Suzanne, Ben and Beth, who were on the other side of the conflict as members of the board of the congregation. And that allows me to hear and listen to every single person that's coming to the circle. And by the time I've finished all the pre-circles with everyone, I will have a sense of all the point of views that are coming to the circle conversation itself. And that allows me to be multi-partial, which is another of our terms in the glossary. It means that I begin to hear all those point of view, and I can take on the side of that person. I could stand at their side and say, this is what this person needs, or this is what this person is feeling, etc. And I did a circle, the first circle that I led, we called in our community the choir circle. There were certain names we'd give them based on who was there or what had happened or when it happened. So this one we called the choir circle, and there were 12 people that came to the choir circle. And I didn't know what I didn't know, and one person was not pre-circled. And when this person came into the circle, at one point, they started talking about, asking questions about what it was we were doing. And I realized in that moment, I didn't do my homework. I had to pre-circle everyone coming. First of all, I didn't understand this person's point of view. Second of all, they didn't understand the process and that we were here and our only agreement in the circle is to be reflective, and they hadn't been heard. So all three of those things were challenges to the circle going forwards, because this one, I had to pause and tell them what this was about and why we were here, and everybody else already knew that. So I strongly say to you, always pre-circle every person coming to the circle, because I learned the hard way by not having that one person come and speak to me ahead of time. Yeah, so I think that's what I'd like to share tonight. Are there any questions or final comments that anyone wants to make? Yeah, Wendy.
Okay, so
Yeah,
I have a
okay.
question about having the pre-circle when you're doing the pre-circle with the community. If
Yeah.
you're doing a pre-circle with a number of people who have one point of view and pre-circle with another point of view, how do you let them know, A, that there's another point of view, and not, so sometimes when people get in a group, you have that peer think thing that builds it into more.
Sure.
How do you?
How do I balance that?
Yes, that's a good word. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So remember, the skill we're using is reflective listening. So and remember that a pre-circle is before the circle. So I want to gather information so that I understand the points of view. I want to, in a pre-circle, make sure everyone knows what it feels like to be heard and to be reflected and have that experience. So those are two parts of the pre-circle process. And by doing those two things, it actually de-escalates the feelings. My experience is that when people are heard, rather than going, oh yeah, blah, 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 oh yeah, blah, 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 no. Reflective listening and the pause to say, you know, Wendy, this is what I understand. And John, this is what I understand. And Xana, this is what I understand. If all three of you are in the room, you, Wendy, will hear my reflection of Xana and identify and go, yeah. And what happens? We start with this energy here, and actually the reverse happens. That energy drops. As people are understood, the energy in the room actually softens. The same way as if I was with one-on-one. And it's more efficient. If I've got a list of 10 people, some people will say, well, this is a long process. And I say, yes, it is. But if I've got a list of 10 people and I were to take an hour to pre-circle each person, or a half hour even, that's a lot of hours. But if I could have 3 people in the room at once, and they're all hearing from each other, that actually brings more voices into the room and they better understand the situation from their point of view. And depending upon the circumstance, I may not know necessarily that there's this A group and B group. Sometimes conflict happens that way. And so you know, separate the points of view. Sometimes you might, because of scheduling, you might have 3 or 4 people that represent 3 or 4 different sides to the conflict all in the same room. You might do one community pre-circle. So you start cultivating the garden of conflict because people start hearing each other's points of view and hear the facilitator reflecting those points of view. And that's powerful. When I first did my first community pre-circle, it was really amazing because the community started to really understand how this conflict affected each person and how it affected the wider community. Susanna, you were referencing, you know, you started understanding all the different aspects of the conflict that you brought to your pre-circle tonight. And if 2 or 3 of those people were in the room together, you know, you identify an author and receiver, and then there are a couple of others, they start seeing more broadly where the conflict is being experienced by each other and by the wider community. So my experience is not that things like hype up, be reflective. And that actually helps people connect. Great question. Thank you. John, I'm noticing your hand.
Will there be a recording of what I missed available?
Yes, I've been recording this evening. And I think I'm going to make it an audio recording rather than a video because video is just a really big format.
Right.
So Aliye and I are working that out actually behind the scenes and trying to, so we've recorded this. It records both an audio track by itself and a video. And I'm going to find a way to get that to you guys, a link to that information, or it may just be a file that I send out. And there is a file from last week as well. So if anyone wants to have that. One question I have for the group, and Zana, I see your hand, is if you all would like to get together, one of the things that I'd like to ask between now and next week is that you connect with someone else and practice reflective listening and maybe even practice the pre-circle again, so that you come back next week having practiced a pre-circle with someone. So if you're willing to put your email in the chat so that you can make a time with someone to connect, that would be great. So if you go to the chat window and open it up so it says everyone in the meeting, and then type in your email address, then that would enable everybody to connect. And if I see all the email addresses, then what I can do as well, when I send out the, I'll send out an email, I call it Taking It Home, and these are suggested practices. I'll just include your emails and CC everyone. I've been BCCing everybody, but I'll CC everyone. So you'll have each other's emails, and it looks like everybody's putting their emails in, so great. Zana, you had a thought or a question, and then John, and then Jan, I mean. Zana?
Zana, you're muted.
My partner, in listening to me, used these clarifying questions. And when she did, I realized I didn't do that at all. And
when you were facilitating?
Yeah, I didn't do that, but we should have. Is that correct? We should have gone.
Yeah, so these questions are really helpful because they help the person in the pre-circle, they guide them gently without our judgment. So if you go back and I can send again the empathy blocks, it keeps us as facilitators from blocking empathy and going, oh yeah, I know that I've heard this sob story before and I have a better one, or, you know, or you start advising them. We're not here in a pre-circle to give any advice. We're just here to listen. And these questions help us stay focused on listening and then being able to reflect.
It was really powerful to hear her questions and realize I had not done that. I think I did okay without them, but it was not the same, in my opinion.
Yeah, and so great noticing that. And next time you can lean into the questions and see what that's like too. This is why this is all learning. And we don't always understand it, and we go, oh yeah, maybe that's what they're there for. John.
I think I asked my question. I'm not sure.
Oh, you did?
I have
Okay.
another one.
Jan, you need to unmute.
Oh, there. I'm wondering if there's a need to remind participants that they need to speak for themselves and not generalize. You know, I was feeling, or everybody
Yes.
I talked to said they felt.
It doesn't matter what they say. What matters for us as facilitators is to reflect the meaning of what you're hearing. So if you're hearing someone say, well, you know, I'm just going to use some names in the room. Mati said, blah, blah, blah. You know, Mati said, Sarah Elizabeth's doing a terrible job of leading this workshop. So you reflect back what you hear her say, you know, and that's all you do is you reflect the meaning of what you're hearing. And the questions will allow the person to share. Now remember, listen to the question. What was said or done that you would like to bring to a restorative circle?
Mm-hmm.
And if what was said or done was, well, I'm feeling this way about this person, okay, then you reflect that. What was said, and then you ask the question again, what was said or done that you want to bring to a restorative circle? And you keep asking that same question like a mantra. They will think through what they want to say. And if what they want to say is something that's a judgment of someone else, reflect that back. You will get to that place of what was said or done. And then you can modify with the other questions here. You may want to even say, once you've heard about all these opinions that this person has or comments, is there a key moment that stands out for you that would help us, that represents this event or this experience? Is there one key moment? So again, it's asking that person to identify that for themselves. Okay. John, you raised your hand. I think we'll take one more comment.
Probably remembered the question. So how do we get to practice with each other? Do we use Zoom or what?
I think that I'm going to leave that up to you. I won't be able to set up a Zoom room for the two of you. If you're comfortable making a phone call, I've done pre-circles over the phone. That works well. I'm going to leave it to you to email each other and connect at times that work for you. If you're having trouble connecting, again, I'm going to send an email out shortly with some taking it home things. And if you're having trouble connecting, let me know and I'll see if I can't make some suggestions as to how you might do that. You can also, if there's someone in your life that you would like, that you know has a conflict happening, you might choose to ask them if they would be willing to sit and do a pre-circle. I would like to suggest that you ask for permission, because at the moment that you're asking, you know, hey, can I hear about a conflict that you have? You want to create a little bit of trust and you want to create permission to be reflective. So let them know that you would like to reflect what you're understanding as a practice. So if there's someone in your community that you would like to do that with, it doesn't necessarily have to be someone from our little community. Do this with someone at home. It could be a spouse, could be a child, could be a friend. You'll find that as you start exploring, all of a sudden you'll start seeing conflict everywhere. That's what happens when we're doing this work, is conflict is everywhere, and all of a sudden you become more aware of it. So look for my email. If I don't know if I'll get it out tonight, but maybe tomorrow morning. If not tonight, look for my email. It will have it will be titled Taking It Home, and it'll be practices. This link that we use to get into the Zoom tonight will be the same link for the next 4 sessions. Did everyone get my email with sort of the step-by-step summary of how we'll be working the next few weeks? Next week, we'll be doing a demonstration pre-circle. So one of my taking it homes is to think about the conflict that you shared and were pre-circled about tonight. And would you be willing to bring that to a practice session next week? What I'd like to do is have one of you bring that to the session, and I will do a brief pre-circle and help you identify who needs to be present to resolve the conflict. And then the other participants will take on those roles. So if someone has a conflict, let's say within their family, you may have a brother, a sister, a mother, a father, a cousin, an aunt, an uncle, however your family dynamic is. And we will give each person a role to play, and then you'll be asked to speak to that person and give them a sense of what their role is in the conflict. And I've done this a number of times, and it actually is pretty amazing how it works. So we'll have the person bringing the conflict speak to and be heard by each person very briefly to just get a sense of their role. And then we'll step into the process and practice. And I'll probably have a few things to share as we go along, sort of taking a time out and describing what it is I've just done or how the conflict is going. And if there are questions about process or whatever, we can ask those at the end. Sound like a plan? So thank you for your participation. I hope this has been a helpful next step along the journey. If you have any questions, please ask them in response to the Taking It Home for this week. And I will see you next week on Tuesday night, 6:30.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you so much. Have a great week. Blessings, everyone.
Thanks.